All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and hello to our European attendees and New Zealand. Wow, what time is it in New Zealand? Thanks for joining us, I think, tomorrow morning. And thanks for joining today's webinar presented by Ziflow. My name is Mike Peterbaugh, and I'll be one of your hosts today for today's webinar on automation and the creative production process. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Attendee lines are muted, and that's just to cut down on background noise like lawnmowers or barking dogs, or in my case, barking homeschooled children. Our session today is being recorded, and a copy will be sent out along with the slides after we finish up today. We will take questions at the end of today's presentation, but please do feel free to enter them at any time during the course of the webinar in the webinar interface. All right, we're moving along. Let's meet our hosts. As I mentioned, my name is Mike Peterbaugh, and I'm the CMO here at Ziflow. I am joined today by our esteemed VP of Operations, Will Liu, who heads up our customer success team and strategy, and is one of our subject matter experts when it comes to creative workflow and ops.
Hi, everyone. Excited to have everyone on the webinar today.
All right. For those of you who aren't familiar with Ziflow, we're the leading innovator in the online proofing space, helping agencies and brands worldwide solve their most pressing review and approval challenges. And if this is something that you and your team are looking for help with, you can find more information on our website at www.ziflow.com. All right, now that we got that commercial out of the way, let's jump into what we're going to talk about today in today's discussion. As you all know, in marketing, there's a big difference between being busy and being productive. And unfortunately, all too often, that distinction comes down to how well you organize and maximize your marketing workflow, optimizing the way you accomplish the work that you've been assigned so that you're maximizing the time spent on high value, impactful activities. But as we all know, marketing is full of less than exciting and glamorous tasks that take up lots of our time every day. So today, we're going to talk about some examples of how you can use automation to get and stay organized, manage file transformations, keep team members on the same page, and lastly, ironically, we'll end with how to kick off projects right. Before we jump into the examples, I wanted to talk a bit about when automation makes sense for you and your team. When we're working with our customers setting up some automation routines within Ziflow, their first question is, where do we start? And what should we automate first? And Will and I both hate the "it depends" answer, but it depends. But there are some high-level indicators of what types of tasks would make good automation candidates, such as tasks that are super repetitive, routine, and time-intensive, tasks that don't require anything more complex than, say, an if-then rationale. And I don't want to discount it too much because you can do a little bit more than that. But this is a good distinction here between automation and AI. If you came today looking for an AI discussion, well, you might want to hang around anyway, but that's not what we're going to talk about. We're definitely going to talk about kind of like these automation routines that, while simple, can get you back tons of time each week. And lastly, this is what I typically call the robot test. And it's a simple robot test, which is if a robot could do it, it should do it. And I'll get into some of those examples as we go through the examples. So let's get into the examples. The first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to start with some ideas on how to use automation to get and stay organized. I think that's a key point, is to stay organized. The first idea for automation is around automating new project or client file structures. So if you're able to automate this, you can knock this out in just a few clicks, or maybe even with a simple drag and drop. And if you've been on our webinars before, you've heard Will say pretty often that there are small things that you can do that has a compounding benefit down the line. And this is definitely one of those things. When you copy exactly each time and provide this consistent approach to a file structure, and there could be multiple different, there could be different types of file structures for, a project type or, a different, client type. But it does make it easy for team members to navigate and search. For example, if the folder is always called branding assets and it's always in the same place, everyone knows where to go look and how to access those files. And again, this is one of those compounding things that seems so simple at the beginning, We're going to talk about some research about that in a little bit, but it's one of those things that compounds itself over time. And one added benefit is that for team members that are outside of your creative or marketing team, like for the finance team, for example, maybe they need to access or share files. Maybe they may need even to drop in files for the account or for the project, like invoices or chargeback info. It makes it easier on them as well to quickly navigate and search. And that's really important, especially when you start working with people outside of the organization. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well, and when we get to notifications a little bit later. And most importantly, this easily passes the robot test. It doesn't require a ton of thinking. And that can be a time sink, and it's repetitive and it's routine work. One quick hack here is you don't even really need an app or a script for this. You can create your ideal file structure just as a series of empty folders and copy them over to your new project tree instantly. We can demonstrate later about how you can do this in Ziflow, but that's a really simple hack that I think, almost immediately, just from a consistency and a predictability standpoint, will pretty quickly, pay dividends for you as your teams especially grow and as you work on projects with more diverse team members. I wanted to take a minute here to share some research into the subject of productivity and efficiency. About 5 years ago, NASA commissioned a research study to help them figure out ways for astronauts to move and work more efficiently in space. First of all, I thought it was pretty funny that NASA actually went outside to find people smarter than them. I didn't think that was possible, but they did. And the team at ASU's School of Business helped them with this project. And what they found was, now, this may seem super simple when you just kind of put it on paper here, but they found that working faster doesn't always translate into getting more done and being more productive. I think probably a lot of us would agree with that. And but what they really kind of teased out of this was the secret to productivity is doing things in the right order, which sounds obvious, but it really does challenge you to think about what those steps are and in which order they should be executed. Will and I did a webinar late last year on workflow and setting up automated workflow for your review and approval process. And that is definitely one of those areas where you have to sit down and really challenge what you think the steps are and in which order they should be executed. And I think the file example we just gave is probably one of those kind of super basic ones, but it really does kind of contribute to that line of thinking. If you're interested, I've added a link to the research in question that I just mentioned at the bottom of this slide, and that'll be included in the PDF of today's presentation that gets sent out. So please do go check it out. It's pretty interesting stuff. And there's a lot more to it than my just kind of token mention here on this slide. There's a lot of interesting stuff. I've got a couple of runner-up ideas for using automation for better organization, and they're both at the file level. First is to automate the batch renaming of files. I think photo shoots is probably the first example that comes to my mind, and maybe a few of you on the call today are thinking of, is where file names often get coded to the hardware's file naming convention from the camera itself, which can be an issue that is compounded when you have multiple photographers or multiple cameras and providing the images from a single shoot. And I think the same goes for design comps coming from different designers, especially if you've got a team of designers, one specializing in video, the other one's specializing in large format. Maybe you've got another designer taking their work and kind of cutting up images for social media and whatnot. When you have multiple team members working on a project and they're all providing design comps, the naming convention can kind of get out of hand. So automating the renaming of files is offered in some design apps. I know many of the Adobe apps do offer it, especially for the photography products. But if not all of your team members have access to those apps, it could turn into a manual job to rename them all to fit your project's naming convention. And this is an example of 100% passes the robot test. A manually intensive kind of low value type of project work, but that's super important, right? You kind of have to rationalize something that is like of lower value but needs to be done. You might not always think of that as low value, but as far as what you're pouring into resource time, it can be. The other idea is to automate the copying, moving, offloading actions related to folders and files. We're going to talk about sharing of files and notifications in a bit, but I think this is another quick way to save time and cut down on mistakes over time. And I've got actually an example of how that would look in a later slide. So let's keep moving. File transformations. This is kind of down at the file level, but this is super true about being a benefit when you're dealing with files, or I say files, I'm kind of old school, but it's really media type at scale. So I know many of you on this call are dealing with hundreds or if not thousands of files that get associated with a project. The photo shoot example we just talked about before is a good one as an example. But really any decently sized project is going to come with a wide range of media types. And those media types need to be shared, reviewed, just even kind of like really quickly looked at by team members that may not always have access to the native design formats that are necessary. And that's kind of related to another idea, which is converting design file, video. Converting design files into easily accessible formats is one, but then upscaling and downscaling a video is another. And both of these pass the robot test for sure. And you can also get some multi-step automation going here as well, if you go back to our previous example, and taking these raw files, these raw media types, and getting them into your project's naming convention while you're converting them into your preferred formats. So, I talked a little bit earlier about, kind of passing the robot test if it's, kind of a simple if-then statement. I didn't really mean to discount it that much because there is, definitely some multi-step automation that you can handle with relative ease. And I think that's a pretty good example, is renaming a bunch of files of different media types while you're converting them into like one maybe simple format, such as like a PNG or PDF from a wide range of media types. And then also, like I said, kind of upscaling and downscaling video for different uses, or just for easier transport. Taking something out of full 1080 and bringing it down into kind of standard def. If you just need a proxy copy, just to give someone an overview of what the video is about, that might be easier than shipping off a 40 gig full HD file. And some of you are laughing on the call that 40 gig is probably small, and you're definitely right on that. So yeah, I think file transformations is definitely one that, for those of you on the call from larger agencies, you think about, when you've got multiple media types from different types of creative tools, this one might be chalked up to the intern to not only rename them, but then get them all into PDFs or PNGs so they can be easily shared or stored, maybe even just for offline storage, right? This is definitely something you can automate and then give something a little bit more higher value to your team members to work on. All right, moving along nicely here. Let's move into automating notifications. And you might be thinking, isn't that what Slack is for? And yes, Slack, Teams, Trello, Basecamp, even email. Yeah, those are the end result. But how are you getting those updates into those systems to your team members? I always like to start this when we start talking about notifications, even just in our online proofing product in Ziflow, about how best to manage notifications in general before you even get to talking about automating them. Is you kind of start with the question is, how many projects are you working on right now? And our research probably has told us that those of you on this call are probably at least have 4 going on right now, with a third of you juggling as many as 6 or more. So that's a lot of projects going on at one point. Now, the second piece of that question is, are all of those projects staffed by the exact same team members? No, probably not. So this creates a challenge, really, and an opportunity for quickly handling notifications, especially when it comes to new files being available for reviewer use. So by automating file-ready notifications, you can cut down on the time lost to handoffs. This is especially useful when you work with specialists, video, copywriters, 3D design as examples. That you can notify those specialists when there are actions they need to specifically take. By not adopting a mass notification approach and targeting your notifications, you really cut down on distractions for other team members. I'm going to give you an example of that in just a second, but I think that's a really key point for us to kind of maybe talk about a little bit more, is the idea of targeting your notification. So that's one thing to consider when you're just thinking about automation in general and looking at what to automate. Is you can automate both wide but also super narrow, and that they both still have equal value. So let's look at an example of a narrow notification. So this is actually an example from within Ziflow, and it shows how you can automate notifications to just one person and or a smaller team or group, as opposed to just blindly sending out notifications to everyone who might be on the team, or if you think about it in the project management context, everyone who might be associated with the project in the project management app. So here we've set up a hot folder. In our case, this is on top of Dropbox. And we basically told Ziflow that whenever a file gets added to this folder in Dropbox, and in this case, it's a video file that we're looking for, just video files, and you can probably start to get the idea here of what we're talking about, I'm going to notify a specific team member, in this case, the video editor. I can then also, or instead, it's kind of an and or situation, share that file link with a team, in this case, just the video team. So, you could swap out the video guy for the, if it's a Word doc, it may be the copy team that needs to look at it. If it's a PDF, it might be everybody. If it's a PNG or an AI file, it might be the designer. But the key point here is that the right people get notified, and the larger team wasn't disruptive, and everyone went about their business. So in a way, you indirectly actually just bought the rest of the team back a little bit of time. There's a whole body of research into the whole concept of context switching, which is this idea of getting out of your flow state when you're working, when you're in the zone, when you're in the groove, and you're basically distracted and you want to go check on a notification or an email that just popped up. So when you're able to target these types of notifications, it really does, like Will likes to say, it really does compound that time saving. And it really pays for itself back around over time. All right, a runner-up idea around notifications, and somewhat similar, is the idea of a tripwire or a watched folder. So we just kind of walk you through an example of watching a folder for a specific file being added. If you're waiting on a new or versioned file, or just want to kind of keep an eye on general flow of work being done in a particular project, you could also set a notification tripwire when files have been added, removed, or updated in a folder. Again, this is just another example of reducing management overhead of having to open up a communication app to send out a message on your behalf. Really, at the end of the day, just let a robot do it. I mean, if you can automate this type of thing, I would 100% do it. All right, let's move on to the, one of our last areas for discussion, which is funny because, like I said, it's ironic that we're talking about this last, but kicking off projects right. We did talk about the folder structure before. That is a really good example of kicking off a project right. And then, I think something that was related to that too. And, this might be kind of specific to Ziflow a little bit, is around automating proof creation. And this is something that we talk a lot about. It's probably one of the first things that we work with our customers when they want to adopt any type of automation. Is they want to kick off the review and approval process by simply dropping a file into a project folder, and have that file kick off our new review process auto-magically, as I like to say. And like I said, this is a little specific to Ziflow, but it's a really good example of how to integrate online proofing, regardless, whichever online proofing app you use. We hope that you use Ziflow, but whatever online proofing app you use, this is a really good way of starting to think about how you might integrate it into your overall MarTech stack. And really what this does is it cuts down on the steps of uploading, selecting, and notifying team members. So uploading the proof, but also just selecting and notifying team members. We've talked about this on other webinars, but it drives consistency of actions required. And that's really around roles and responsibilities. By being able to, set out ahead of time, who this project team is, who are the decision makers, who we want be involved in certain stages. and also enriching with stage triggers and deadlines. It really does not only drive consistency of process, but I think what you'll find in the long term is it also drives consistency of output. And it definitely passes the robot test. It's error prone at any size. So this is something that if you can automate, you make it way more predictable. That's a great thing. And also it helps you create scale. It actually helps you get more work done because you're automating things in the right order. And as the people at NASA told us, that will help us out in the long run with creativity, or with, with just being productive, but also creative as well. So proof creation, I would say, is a big time automation candidate, especially if you are in the third of our research respondents from last year that told us that they're juggling at least 6 projects concurrently. Setting this out and going about, creating the new review and approval process for each of those can really add up on time, and time better spent, obviously, doing high value creative stuff and meeting deadlines. And our last example, before we actually jump into to see how we kind of approach this within Ziflow itself, the last example I wanted to talk about is intake forms. And this is kind of another take on automating proof creation, but turning it toward, I would say, turning it outward so that it faces your customer, partner, vendor, or other third parties that you might work with. Intake forms are an elegant form of automation that will take your new creative content, again, from, to traditionally an outside source, like a vendor partner, a customer, or a client, and it automatically creates a new review process. You can tie it to workflow and custom metadata as needed. And again, this is somewhat specific to Ziflow, but the idea here is to automate the submission process and automatically start actions, the notifications, the schedules, and the expectations for all those involved on the review side of the process. This is an awesome example of cutting down on handoff time. Having something sit in one person's single point of failure. I hate to call it that way, but it is one person's inbox or a project management intake inbox. This actually starts the process. Team members are notified again. You could definitely daisy chain the automation that we've talked about to also notify specific notifications. You can enrich your project management apps, and again, this is another great example of how online proofing can sit within your MarTech stack. But it's a great way to actually get everyone the information they need, but also get them working at their soonest possible moment. So that there's no lost handoff time, but also there's no unnecessary downtime. If a designer can just jump to the next project because they've been notified that there's a new creative asset for them to work on, or a new creative brief that was submitted through the system that is now giving them direction to go ahead and start with wireframes or a V1 comp, they can do that. There's no kind of waiting around, sending a note out saying, hey, what's the next project, or I'm done. They can just move on to the next project because the client or the partner or the vendor had already submitted their request and it's being reviewed accordingly. So I think intake forms, if you're interested in intake forms, definitely reach out to us here at Ziflow. You can also go to our resources section on Ziflow.com. We did an entire webinar on intake forms. It's something that we get kind of geeked up about here at Ziflow, because like I said, it really is kind of an elegant form of automation that allows you really just to kick off projects really consistently every time. And one thing I'll say too is if you are an organization that has to worry about levels of marketing compliance, be it brand compliance, or if you're under any type of regulatory compliance, automation as a whole is awesome. But intake forms and automating proof kickoffs is a great way to demonstrate control over your processes, as is automated workflow. So I would definitely go check out the resources that we have on Ziflow.com around intake forms. All right, well, now you guys can stop listening to me talk for quite some time now and actually see some really exciting stuff in the product. I'm going to go ahead and stop share. I'm going to hand the phone over to William. Will, I'm going to hand it over to you to show our attendees how we kind of manifest some of these automation ideas in Ziflow.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. So let's go ahead and take a look at automation in Ziflow. A couple of things. from experience, what I've noticed, especially around automation, is this is probably the number one area that people really kind of end up in paralysis by analysis. They spend so much time thinking about what should be automated, how it should be automated, what they're going to automate, that they end up automating nothing. And the number one tip I always like to give people, especially as we go through an implementation and look at which parts to automate, is that it's not binary. What I've noticed a lot of times is as people start looking at automation in their processes, they feel that it needs to be all or nothing. You're either going to automate the entire thing from beginning to end, or you're not going to automate anything at all, and you're going to handle it all through manual processes. And what I really like to say, what I really like to push Ziflow's clients on is, what if we can automate one or two steps within the overall process? And as Mike alluded to earlier, there's huge compounding effects to just automating one or two steps within the overall process. So my big tip before we jump into actually looking at what this type of automation could be within Ziflow is, automation doesn't need to be binary. It doesn't need to be all or nothing. If you can automate even one or two steps within the overall process, you're going to see massive time savings or efficiencies there. Now, how does automation work within Ziflow? We use a tool that we like to call Zybots. Zybots is essentially the robot that Mike was talking about earlier. Zybots is the tool that helps automate different actions that occur within the system itself. Now Zybots can do a lot of different things. As Mike alluded to earlier, our top response when people ask us, what should I automate? How am I going to automate it? Is it depends. And that's because Zybots is totally flexible in what it can help you accomplish. What I always recommend as we approach automation is, let's work backwards. If you know what your end result is, rather than starting from the beginning and working our way through it saying we want to automate this and then this happens and we should automate that, let's look at the final output and work our way backwards. A very typical example of an automation that I see a lot within Ziflow is renaming a file, converting it, then creating a proof from it. And this is a really standard automation that we see a lot of times, where a file gets uploaded into a cloud storage array, such as Google Drive. Once that file gets uploaded, that file can automatically be renamed. That file can be converted to a different format, a PDF or a JPEG, depending on what you want to convert it to. And then once that file actually gets converted, automatically generating a proof and applying a workflow to it. So here we're automating multiple steps in the process. We are automating the renaming of the file. So once the file gets uploaded, and let's take a look at some of the details around that. Once the file gets uploaded into a folder in Google Drive, we can have it automatically rename the file. We can have it replace text. So if you have standard conventions, but you want to replace with other conventions, you can have it replace text. You can have it completely remove text. You can have it remove marks, or you can customize the file name using personalization tokens as well. This gives a ton of flexibility. As Mike said, a really typical example is when you're getting the RAWs from your photography files. But now this is an automation step in the process here. Once we've renamed the file, we may want to output it into the final asset file, like in PDF. So once the file's been renamed, we can convert that file to a PDF. You get a ton of flexibility here as well. You can say that you want to do all pages, specific pages here. Where does it get outputted to? Are you maintaining your presets? And then we can have it automatically create a proof for us and apply the workflow. So now we're breaking down this automation into a couple of key steps here. Now how I would approach this with a client as we look at automating is, if ultimately we know that we want a PDF to be sent to these group of reviewers for this workflow, that's our starting point. So we can work our way backwards from here. We know that we want a workflow to be applied, and we know that we want to proof this PDF from a workflow. Number one question to ask is, where does that PDF come from? A lot of times the PDF is actually being converted from an Illustrator file, an image, a Word document, a Photoshop file. So now we're actually stepping backwards in the process. If ultimately we know that we want to review a PDF and send it to this specific workflow with different stages and reviewers, then we can go backwards from there, figure out how that PDF is created, where that PDF comes from, and figure out which steps in the process we can automate. Ultimately, your automation could be more steps than this. So you can add in additional Zybots. So maybe along with renaming the file, we want to create a folder tree, or we want to create a specific folder. You can have more steps within your overall automation process. So here we have a 3-step automation, but you can always add in additional steps to this automation as well. And as we're doing that, we're just walking our way backwards to the chain. So we know that the proof should be created, applied to this workflow. Where are these files stored in my cloud storage array? Where does the file come from? What should the file be named? So we're walking our way back into the process. And that's the easiest way to approach automation within Ziflow. If you start from the beginning, that's totally possible. If you already know what automation structure that you want, you can absolutely walk the automation from beginning to end. I know that it's going to start in a cloud storage array. I know that it's when a file is being uploaded. So I'm selecting the events that trigger my automation. I can apply additional details to restrict that, such as I only want it to apply to an image. I only want it to apply when it's happening within these specific folders. So now I'm applying finer details to my automation, and I can choose which automation step that I want to occur. So a couple of different ways I recommend approaching the process is maybe just add in one automation to begin with. Then we can add in additional automations later by including additional Zybots. But you have a ton of different options when it actually comes to the automation creation process. Depending on what the event you select is, you can have it automate things as Mike mentioned earlier, creating a proof, sending an email notification, converting it to a PDF, converting it to an image, transcoding a video, copying or moving the file, renaming the file, sending the file via FTP, creating a folder tree, creating a folder, sending a message or a file to Slack. So a number of different automations that can occur here, or you can have it as simple as creating a proof and applying a workflow. This is really where the it depends comes in, but this is where the Ziflow team can work with you to figure out what steps within the automation can make the most sense and how that automation can be accomplished in Zybots and whether it makes sense to automate to begin with. We have a number of different examples here. We have automations that trigger from intake forms. So upon an intake form submission, so here once an intake form is submitted, we can have it automatically create a proof and set up a workflow to it. Number of different automations here. This can really approach a ton of different things. So we see a lot of standards here where once a file is submitted via intake form, it can automatically create a proof. Once a file is uploaded into Google Drive or Dropbox, it can automatically create a proof. Once that TIFF is uploaded into a specific folder in Dropbox, rename it, convert it to a PDF, then create a proof. So we can also provide different recommendations for automations depending on which steps within the process you're trying to automate as well. And I know I'm mainly focusing on the actual configuration aspects during this demonstration, but that's because of how flexible the tool can be and where the it depends really falls in. We can have the Zybots trigger off of a cloud storage array, Google Drive, Dropbox. We can have it trigger off of intake forms, or we can even have it trigger off of Ziflow itself. So when decisions are being made, when comments are being replied to, when comments are being resolved, when comments are being labeled, or when a new proof or version is created, we can have additional actions occur off of things that are happening within your proof itself within Ziflow. Okay, Now I'm going to jump into a couple of the different questions here that we're seeing coming through chat. This way we can actually walk through a couple of different setups. Now I'm seeing a question about does it need to be a designated company drive or can it be any Google Drive? That's a really great question. So it can be any Google Drive. When I set up my automation, what's great here is you're establishing what's called a connection. This connection could be made with a number of different things. You can connect to a cloud storage array like Google Drive or Dropbox. You can connect to different applications like Basecamp, Slack, or NetSuite. So you're establishing connections. Once you establish a connection, I can actually make that connection to different Zybots. So I may have some Zybots trigger off of my company's Google Drive, and I may have some Zybots trigger off of my personal Google Drive. So you can actually create multiple connections to cloud storage arrays. And as you're creating these flows, you'll be able to pick between the different cloud storage arrays. I only have it connected with my personal Will Lou one, but I can plug in additional drives here or Dropboxes here and actually connect those so I can have my events trigger from different areas. And now I can do this from a personal drive or personal Dropbox, as well as the company drives and company Dropbox. So a ton of flexibility on what's that initial initiation point. Okay, and I'm seeing a great question here about how we manage files that have been converted into different versions. How do we prevent medium quality versions from accidentally being used in delivery of a project? And that is where automation actually becomes extraordinarily key. So a couple of things that you can do here, and we're going to get into the weeds of the it depends here, is how do I prevent medium quality versions from accidentally being used? And the best way to do that is actually automating that conversion or automating that output. That eliminates the error proneness or the human error of someone possibly grabbing the wrong quality, sending that out for production or sending that out to the client. So what you can do here is have the system handle that conversion and that output for you. So if I know that I want to convert a TIFF into a JPEG, for example, rather than having your designer or your studio or your production team output that file for you, hoping that they're naming it correctly so you can quickly identify which one's a low res or which one's a high res, you can have them simply upload their file into a cloud storage array. So we can have them upload into Google Drive. Again, we could put additional restrictions on. We only want to apply this automation when it's an image. We only want to apply this automation when it's a specific folder. We only want to apply this automation when it's uploaded by a specific person. We only want to apply this automation when we recognize something in the file name. So you get a ton of different options here on how to restrict when the automation occurs. But most importantly, let's actually take a look at that automation where we're converting to an image. And this is how you can avoid that accident of someone sending out the wrong quality version by allowing the system to automate that for you. So here I can choose to convert it to an image. And now I can choose my output type. Again, we'll be able to string a ton of these together. But when I choose to convert this to an image, we get to choose the export quality here. So if I always want to ensure that we're exporting at 100% and I know it's the 100% file, I can choose the export quality of 100%. I can have it save and name and store into a specific folder in my storage array, or I can have it email or FTP that outputted file. So now that we've actually created that file, we can send an email to it. Or now that we have actually, didn't mean to hit cancel there. Or now that we have actually converted that file to 100% output, we can send it via FTP as well. So we're going to give you a lot of different options here, but the most important thing is by allowing the system to automate the output of the file, that's where you get a lot of control over avoiding that error of someone grabbing the wrong file and sending it the wrong output. And that was a long answer to a short question, but best bet is to actually automate that whole process. Have the system handle the conversion, have the system store and name that file and place it in the right place, and then even have the system possibly notify and send out that file once it's been created, either as a proof or even a download link to that file. Okay, we're getting a question here about, will this work with other systems? The answer is yes. There's a couple of different options here as I talk about my events. We actually provide a ton of different flexibility when it comes to flows itself. You can do it from different triggers, or you can actually trigger it via the API itself. So a couple of different options here. And from a connection standpoint, we plan on expanding connections to support Box and Office 365 and possibly Teams as well. But you can also use the Ziflow API to trigger these automations as well. So for example, if you want something to automatically create a proof and then update with a specific workflow, you'll be able to handle that using webhooks through Ziflow. This is going to get a little bit more technical here. So if you're interested in learning more on how this automation could work with different tools outside of what's available as a connection, please feel free to reach out to the Ziflow team and we can definitely walk through it with you in more detail. But that's completely possible using our API and webhooks. Those are different entry points into the automation as well. So it doesn't always have to be an intake form or a cloud storage array. There are going to be other options because of the flexibility around Zybots.
Awesome. I want to commend Will and actually recognize him for taking questions on the fly. They teach you on the first day of webinar school that you want to typically take them at the end, but Will, that was very daring of you. So nice work on that. That was great examples too. And thank you for grabbing the questions.
Perfect. And I think really that's all I really had to show around Zybots and the automation within Ziflow. As Mike and I have said a couple of different times on this webinar now, is it really depends. It depends on what you're trying to automate, what steps that you really want to find efficiencies for. So my big tip here is don't try to boil the ocean. Walk it back step by step and figure out whether you can automate one or two steps in the processes. But most importantly, if you have a question and you want to know how you can automate it or what that automation can look like, don't be shy. Reach out to the Ziflow team. Me personally, as well as my client services and support team, we're experts on this. So we're more than happy to jump in, take a look at your automation with you and figure out what steps and what efficiencies we can help you gain.
Awesome. Thanks, Will. All right, I think, well, we already took the questions, which is great. So let me go ahead and just kind of wrap up some key takeaways. I think Will just covered them really well there. But I think at even a higher level, I think some key takeaways from today is that anything that a robot could do, should do in the marketing department. I mean, Will showed some really great examples of maybe even some more, maybe what we would consider maybe a little bit more complex than just straight if-then kind of statements of what you can really accomplish with safe automation and predictable automation in the marketing department. Really good examples of these repetitive, mundane tasks that can be, and usually still are important, which is an even greater reason why they should be automated. And that's to drive consistency and predictability. And we'll make the point once again, the kind of the compounding nature is that time saved via automation is now time spent on high value, creative, and strategic work. And it does compound. And I think one thing you should maybe walk away with is robots, both hardware and software robots, they don't really mind this type of work, really. They're just happy to be working. So I think that's definitely a key takeaway that you want to not feel bad about giving them the mundane stuff to do. We covered the Q&A. I don't see anyone anymore that jumped in. So Will, thank you for taking that on. I appreciate that. If you'd like to see a demo of anything that we showed today, or maybe even some things that we alluded to, please feel free to hit us up at ziflow.com/demo. We'll also be in touch afterwards with a copy of today's slides and presentation, so you can take that opportunity as well to ask for some more information or get a demo, or even kick off your own trial. You can get all of the automation capabilities that we showed today in a trial of Ziflow. You can go to ziflow.com and click on Get Started, and you'll see the Zybots in the trial as well. I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you. Thank you very much, Will, for giving us an awesome demonstration and some great examples to think of. And I want to thank everyone for attending, especially our colleague in New Zealand who either got up super early and or stayed up super late. Appreciate you being on the call. Have a great day, everybody, and be well.